They tied the young dragon for being infertile. Then a human mechanic did the impossible in the high crags of Virith's spire, where the winds screamed through obsidian peaks and the clouds themselves seemed to bow in reverence. The Draconer held court. They were ancient, proud, and dwindling. Once the skies had been thick with their wings bronze, gold, obsidian, and emerald blotting out the sun like living storms. Now only a few dozen remained, each birth celebrated as a miracle. Each failure mourned as the slow death of a species. Kaeltharion was the youngest of them. Barely 2 centuries old, his scales a brilliant cobalt that caught the light like polished sapphire. He had been born under auspicious stars, the elders said. His wings were broad, his flame pure white-hot, his roar enough to rattle the mountain itself. The Draconer placed their hopes on him. When he came of age, they paired him with Silvara, a silver-scaled matriarch whose lineage stretched back to the first brood, but the seasons turned, and no egg appeared. Year after year, Silvara's nest remained empty. The elders watched with growing dread. Kaeltharion endured the examinations, ancient priests probing with crystal rods, chanting over his blood, reading the smoke of sacred herbs. The verdict came at last, delivered in the grand cavern beneath the cold gaze of 100 golden eyes. Infertile, the high matriarch declared. The line of Kaeltharion ends with him. The punishment was older than memory. A dragon who could not continue the bloodline was a burden, a consumer of resources that could not give back. They bound him in chains of meteoric iron, each link inscribed with runes that sapped his strength and dulled his flame. The chains were anchored deep into the stone of the spire's lowest ledge, the place of binding where the wind howled unending and the sun rarely reached. Kaeltharion did not rage. He accepted the sentence with the quiet dignity expected of his kind. He curled his wings around himself, lowered his great head, and let the chains settle across his back like a shroud. The Draconer turned their faces away. A bound dragon was no longer one of them. Centuries might have passed like that Kaeltharion wasting slowly, the last of his fire flickering out had. The humans not come to Virith's spire. They arrived in a battered ore hauler that looked held together by hope and welds. A mining consortium from the lowlands had purchased rights to the abandoned adamantine veins beneath the spire. The Draconer, too proud and too few to work the mines themselves, had leased the depths in exchange for tribute. The humans set up camp in the shadow of the peaks, their machines rumbling like distant thunder. Among them was Elias Kane, a mechanic with grease perpetually under his nails and a mind that saw problems the way poets saw stars. He was 32, wiry, and incurably curious. He had grown up on stories of dragon spheres, noble, untouchable, but the reality was a half-starved myth chained to a rock. Staring at the horizon with eyes the color of deep oceans, Elias first saw a Kaeltharion while repairing a stuck conveyor belt near the lower ledge. The dragon's presence was impossible to miss. 30 meters of coiled muscle and scale. Wings folded tight, chains thick as a man's thigh biting into his hide. Frost rhymed the links. The dragon's breath came slow and shallow. Elias stood there a long time, toolbox dangling from one hand. Over the following weeks he found excuses to work near the ledge. He brought scraps of meat from the mess hall, tossing them within reach. Kaeltharion ignored them at first. Then, one evening, the dragon lifted his head and spoke. His voice, a low rumble that vibrated in Elias's bones. "Why do you linger?" "Little groundling eel," Elias nearly dropped his wrench. Just making sure the equipment's running smooth. "Didn't mean to bother you." "You do not bother me." "The silence bothers me." After that, Elias came openly. He sat on an overturned crate and talked about engines, about the stars he'd seen from orbital stations, about the stubborn pump that refused to prime. Kaeltharion listened. Sometimes he asked questions in that earthquake voice. Sometimes he told stories of his own. Flights above oceans of cloud, battles with sky krakens, the warmth of a clutch of eggs that would never be his. One night, under a sky full of unfamiliar constellations, Elias asked the question that had been burning in him for months. "Why do they keep you?" Kaeltharion's eyes dimmed. Because I cannot give them children. I am broken. Elias frowned. Broken how? You look healthy enough to me. The priests say my seed is barren. My flame cannot kindle life. Elias chewed on that. He'd spent his life fixing things people said were impossible, reactors that shouldn't run, hull breaches and vacuum. A mining drill that had been buried under a rock slide for 40 years. Broken was just another word for not. Understood yet, he started asking careful questions. How did dragon reproduction work? Kaeltharion explained, as best he could. The pairing of flame essences. The resonance of inner fires, the weaving of life from raw ether, channeled through specialized glands deep in the chest. The priests believed Kaeltharion's ether ducts had never fully formed, a rare congenital defect. Elias listened, sketching diagrams in the dirt with a stick. The more he heard, the more it sounded like a plumbing problem on a cosmic scale. Let me take a look, he said finally. Kaeltharion laughed. A sound like boulders grinding. You would examine a dragon's heart flame. The elders would incinerate you. They're not here right now, Elias pointed out. And I've got a portable scanner. Against every instinct, Kaeltharion allowed it. Elias climbed the chains careful, respectfully impressed a handheld medical scanner against the scales over the dragon's chest. The device was meant for humans, but it could map tissue density and energy flow. What it showed made Elias whistle low. Your ducts are there, he said. They're just pinched, like a kinked hose. Scar tissue, maybe from an old injury. Ether's backing up instead of flowing forward. Kaeltharion's eyes narrowed. You claim to see this with your toy have seen, similar blockages in plasma conduits. Pressure builds, flow stops. Fix the kink, flow resumes. And how would you fix the kink? In a dragon, Elias grinned. Very carefully. It took months of planning. Elias smuggled tools up the mountain in pieces. A laparoscope array borrowed from the med bay. Micro cameras, a portable monosiphon he jury-rigged from mining equipment, and most crucially a vial of nanots designed for arterial repair. He spent nights studying dragon anatomy from fragments of ancient texts the miners had unearthed, cross-referencing with human physiology and pure guesswork. Kaeltharion wavered between hope and terror. To allow a human to cut into him was unthinkable. To remain barren forever was unbearable. In the end, hope won. They chose a night when the camp was quiet and the moons were new. Elias climbed onto the dragon's chest with a harness, floodlights powered by a silent generator. Kaeltharion lowered his head and closed his eyes, trusting a creature barely the size of one of his talons. The procedure was delicate beyond words. Elias worked through a tiny incision between scales, guiding tools with trembling hands while the dragon's heart thundered beneath him like a volcano. He cleared the scar tissue, rerouted to minor ducts, and released the nanites to reinforce the walls against future collapse. The entire time, Kaeltharion remained perfectly still, his breath held for hours. When Elias finally sealed the incision with bioadhesive and climbed down, both of them were shaking. Now, Elias said, voice hoarse. We wait. They did not have to wait long. 3 weeks later, Silvara came to the ledge. She had heard rumors, whispers among the humans, strange lights in the night. She landed with the grace of a falling star and regarded the unbound dragon. He was still bound, but his eyes burned bright again, the small human standing defiantly at his side. What have you done, she demanded. Kaeltharion lifted his head high. He has given me back my fire. Silvara's gaze flicked to Elias. Sharp as talons, show me there, beneath the scales. The ether flowed clean and strong. The ducts were open. The resonance was perfect. The elders were summoned. They came in a thunder of wings, circling the ledge like judgment itself. They examined Kaeltharion with their crystals and chants. They found no deception, no lingering flaw. The High Matriarch bowed her ancient head. The binding is lifted. The chains fell away with a sound like breaking bells. Kaeltharion stretched his wings for the first time in decades, and the wind answered with a joyous howl. But the story did not end there. A year later, In the warmest cavern of Virith's spire, Silvara coiled protectively around a clutch of 6 perfect eggs. Their shells shimmered cobalt and silver, veined with light. The Drakener gathered in numbers not seen in centuries. Their voices raised in song that shook the peaks, and at the entrance to the cavern, unassuming in his grease-stained coveralls, stood Elias Kane. Kaeltharion had insisted he'd be there for the hatching. When the first egg cracked, and a tiny cobalt snout pushed free, letting out a squeak of flame, Elias laughed until tears came. Kaeltharion lowered his great head until one. Enormous, I met the human's gaze. You did the impossible. My friend Elias wiped his face and shrugged. Nah. Just fixed a kink in the hose, the dragon's laughter rolled like summer thunder, and for the first time in generations, the skies of Virith's spire filled with the sound of new wings.